and welcome to this week's episode of Wide Angle. At the end of October this year, China's Xi Jinping consolidated his position as the party president, as the leader of China and its military when he was reappointed. What does his reappointment mean for India? What does it mean for the rest of the world? Many people see him as the strongest leader now around the world. Joining us to talk about this is Jayadeva Ranade, formerly with the government and the cabinet secretariat, now the author of Xi Jinping's China. Very importantly, Mr. Ranade, you have three leaders on the cover of this book: Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, and now Xi Jinping. And you start off by talking about how he really is the third biggest leader in China in recent contemporary history, shaping the way Chinese communism now is going to be sort of practiced, or the politics of China is going to go forward. How do you rate this particular individual's rise in China? What is the reason for it? And is it correct to call him the most important leader in the world today?
His acolytes, and let me start with that, his acolytes say that under him, China has embarked on a new 30-year era, like those of Mao and Tang before him. So they have already placed him at the same level as Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. I think the latest 19th Party Congress, which was held from the 18th to 24th of October, that further consolidated his position by incorporating his thinking, called Xi Jinping's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for the new era, into the party constitution. The party propaganda apparatus and the country's propaganda apparatus already have started referring to it as Xi Jinping thought. So they are implying that he is already at the same level as Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping, thereby eclipsing his predecessors. So I think his position is fairly solid. There are two other things I would mention here. One, he already has the maximum number of formal titles, more than any other Chinese Communist Party leader till today. So that's why people tend to say, and I think quite rightly, that he is today more powerful than even Mao and Deng Xiaoping in formal terms. The second thing is, at the Politburo meeting, immediately after the party congress, they used a new term for him in their notification, where they have referred to him as Ling Shui. Earlier it was Ling Chir or Ling Tao. Ling Shui is a term which refers to a respected leader, and the last time it was used was for Mao Zedong. So they have already formalized him as, shall I say, preeminent even among the 7 strong men who actually rule China today.
And therefore also not just consolidating his position vis-a-vis China domestically, the party, as we said, but also the message that China is sending out to the rest of the world with his reappointment and his the inclusion of his ideology or his writings in the party constitution as well. This control, many people outside China say, has been accompanied by also a form of aggression, which you've seen either on the economic front or on the military front, as the case may be in the South China Sea, or even on our own borders for that matter. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. In fact, I would, I think you're being a bit charitable to the entire thing. I would say what we are witnessing is a hardening of the Chinese state since Xi Jinping took over. A hardening internally, whereas domestic controls have been made even more stringent, and externally in terms of foreign policy, where he has blended aggression with assertiveness that existed earlier. So I think what we are seeing is Xi Jinping injecting a new vigor, if I may call it, into Chinese strategy and Chinese foreign policy. And at the 19th Party Congress, in his work report, for the first time, he has spelt out where he hopes China will be by a given date. He has bracketed them.
Right.
He has also said that his thoughts or socialism with Chinese characteristics could be a good alternative to democracy. So he has projected that on the ideological front, and he has said that China's development will be something which will be backed by military force to ensure its success. I think for China's neighbours, certainly, this is something that should cause concern, and they should monitor it very carefully.
We'll come to the neighbours in just a second, but this point that you're making about the assertion, the assertiveness and the aggression and the combination of two on the global stage, it also comes at a time when, in fact, it's 1 year since Donald Trump became president, and there's been so much upheaval globally because everyone's always wondering what he's going to wake up and tweet in the morning and how then that affects foreign policy. Vis-a-vis the Russians as well, we see how that's playing out on the European stage in particular. So when you look at these great powers globally, are we looking at whether it's on socialism and therefore, his view on democracy versus socialism, or whether it's the global economic conversations taking place, is this the only country to consider today?
I don't say it's the only country so far. USA is certainly in the reckoning. I don't think we should underestimate the USA's resilience or its inherent strength in terms of economy or military power, particularly when we link up defense science and technology with military power. But Xi Jinping has very clearly laid out that by 2050 he expects to rival, if not surpass, the United States. And I think that is, that stated ambition is something that one needs to take note of, the confidence with which he has said it. And as far as Russia is concerned, I think in economic terms, China is already way ahead. Russia is going to have a difficult time trying to match up. In fact, they are trying to maintain their independence in their dealings with China at the moment. That's how I look at it. But it is with the US, unless the US decides that it wants to remain the preeminent power, that is where the clash of interests will occur. And I think there is, at least the Chinese are very confident that they are going to rival, as I said, if not surpass the United States.
Well, as far as the US is concerned, I mean, when Donald Trump came into the White House, one of the first things he did was make sure that, the United States had pulled out of the TPP, and then from there you get to this stage where you're talking about the Indo-Pacific, you're talking about the quadrilateral in this part of the world, India flanked on the western front of this new geopolitical framework, and the United States on the eastern side. Clearly, America's positioning of itself in the region vis-a-vis China and looking to other powers in the region to be this counterweight. So, in the beginning, I think there wasn't too much clarity on whether Trump would actually pull out of this arrangement. Would there be some place on the spectrum between what one foreign policy expert had called collusion to confrontation between the United States and China, where that relationship would sit and where India would fit in that relationship? So, on that spectrum, where do you place India and the United States and China today?
Well, let's start with the United States, where I think the scene is still confused. I mean, they are not yet clear on how to deal with China. People who were, if I may say, more clear-eyed and felt that China needs to be restrained, if not contained, are still in the system, but they seem to be at the moment, shall I say, overshadowed by the people who feel that they have greater interests in China, and if they deal with China in a more amicable fashion. So this is going on. But mind you, people like Steve Bannon haven't been jettisoned, and he's still around. He's been entrusted with a comprehensive review of US policy towards China. So that may still result in some hard measures that Trump will take. Having said that, let me say that China itself is very clear that they are looking at the United States as a country with whom they will have periods of confrontation and periods of competition, though they would like to keep it at a competitive level rather than a confrontational level. That is what their strategists are also saying, and it seems to be turning out that way. Trump is in China today. He'll be there for 2 days. He's taken along the heads of 40 major companies with him, and there are billions of dollars of deals already in the works, including for gas, etc. Some of them will be huge investments into the United States, countries like Texas and other places, which will generate a lot of jobs. So Trump can come home and say that he's created jobs and managed to get things out of China. As far as India is concerned, I think we need more clarity. on what exactly we are looking at. China looks at the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea or the
As its
Pacific as a
backyard.
continuum. For us also, there's a lot of trade taking place through the Indian Ocean and through the South China Sea. So what does it mean for us, particularly with the expanding reach of the Chinese Navy, with the establishment of Djibouti as a base?
Yeah.
These are the areas that we have to look at. And I think as far as the US is concerned, it's fine that we are looking at China, we are talking about doing things together, but what about Pakistan? Pakistan is no longer, I think, just one entity to the west of us. It is now virtually a satellite of China, and we'll have to look at it from that perspective.
So you've actually tied a lot of things in together, which brings me to my next question, because a lot of China's growth or China's stature on the world stage right now, for good or bad, has been because of its economic reach and its economic clout. The One Belt, One Road project, ambitious interlinking, interconnectivity, something that logically many would say that India would have naturally been a part of had it not been for the China-Pakistan economic corridor and the CPEC. But you talk about peripheral diplomacy in your book. Is the One Belt, One Road sort of peripheral diplomacy that China is also looking at? Is it wider than just the region? What could India's response be? Because yes, the CPEC is a problem.
Absolutely. In fact, the One Belt, One Road is not just peripheral diplomacy. For China, it's actually, if you look at it, it's a China conceived project, and it is intended to literally girdle the globe. What they want to do is link their production centers with natural resource centers and markets around the world on a China built communications pathway. That's what they're doing. So it's expansion of Chinese influence all across. But they haven't spelt out really what the One Belt, One Road is. And at the moment, what they have are little pieces which they have developed over the last 10 to 15 years, which they brought under this umbrella term One Belt, One Road. The CPEC, or the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is certainly a large part of it. It's the sixth leg, but it's the largest and the one which has moved the fastest. For us, in fact, I think we should look at it as a sign of how the One Belt, One Road will start impinging on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of China's neighbors. The CPEC is already impinging on us. As you know, Pakistan has moved to more closely integrate Gilgit and Baltistan into the Pakistani state.
That's right.
And so thereby they are bending the borders with us already. China's own position on POK, Gilgit, Baltistan has changed. They put their money where their mouth is by going there, and now they are building up military capabilities inside Pakistan to protect their interests. So for us, I think there are a large number of factors that we need to watch out.
Many red flags.
Many. And as far as the One Belt, One Road is concerned, I noticed your remark about, that we didn't join it and that there were questions. I think people who ask those questions should ask themselves, what is there in it for us? There is no connectivity for us that comes through directly from the existing projects.
Right.
I don't think India is willing to incur huge external debt unless we get something tangible in return.
Right.
So the One Belt, One Road, to my mind, doesn't really fit in.
Makes sense.
I think what we need to remember here is the Chinese are very keen that we join the One Belt, One Road, because they feel that with India joining or even signing up for it, a whole lot of other countries will feel reassured and come on board. And we have held back so far.
In fact, that's the next question, which is that it is also reaching out directly to India's neighbors, everywhere in the South Asian region, Pakistan set aside, but Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, all these countries that it's been wooing through massive infrastructure projects. And who will say that, why should we turn away from China when we're getting all this? What are we getting from India in the bargain? But I think that's a conversation Delhi needs to have in its own head as well.
But you're quite right. I mean, why should they turn away if they're getting cash incentives, if they're getting money in? And here, let me just mention two things. You left out Maldives, by the way.
That's
and
right.
China
Maldives,
just bought two islands there. But in Sri Lanka, just notice, when the Chinese moved in with Hambantota, of course, Sri Lanka is now groaning at the debt burden.
The debt trap, yeah.
They've now gone ahead with the Colombo City Development Plan, which was put on hold. But in a 3-year span, the Chinese have been able to win over the new regime into accepting the Colombo plan. So they're moving ahead on that. I think the Chinese know how to spread money around and to reinforce their influence, which is what we are seeing. In Nepal too, the people I think are frankly a bit confused as to how to handle it, but they are taken up by the promise of infrastructure development and they want to go in there. I think India there has to play a bit of a greater role. We can't match dollar for dollar, but certainly bring to their attention the kind of benefits that they're getting from us, which they will not get from China, and I think play a little bit of hardball and inform them very clearly that even if they develop rail links to Lumbini, etc., we are not going to collaborate by promoting tourism for them through that route.
You think that something like that would actually make a
I
difference?
think we need to do it because we are going to have a Chinese presence at Lumbini, which is barely 30 kilometers across the border. If the relationship between China and India is not friendly, if it's negative or even hostile, then I think that's a flashpoint for us. So Nepal has to be, I think, told very clearly.
And I think clearly, I mean, as you're pointing out, that why should these countries turn away good money that they might be getting for infrastructure if it's for their own development or benefit, as the case may be. But the challenges for India are clearly visible in that kind of a scenario. We were having a conversation just before we started this interview as well about the borders with India, and sort of, you know, for years I've been covering foreign policy for 2 decades, and it was all about stability along the border and, you know, agreements that were creating the stability and civilization old relationship. But this is a new phase of confrontation between Delhi and Beijing, and confrontation at different levels, whether it is territorial expansion, whether it is actual conflict, short conflict, small conflict, whatever it may be, or economic conflict as we're seeing it. How does Delhi engage now with China, given the fact that there is this assertiveness and aggression that's also being reflected in its India policy?
I think it's a very pertinent question, actually, what you raised, particularly if I may digress a little bit and say that you yourself have grown up in an environment where the borders have been tense, though maybe not hot, over the years. But today what we have seen is, since particularly I would say Xi Jinping's coming, so therefore 2013 is the peg that I would put it on, there has been a qualitative change in the extent of the intrusions and the kind of intrusions that have been taking place. Here I will mention 3 very quickly. The first is the one in the Depsang Plains in April 2013, when Premier Le Keqiang was coming here, so called on his first visit as Premier to India. He held that up as a great plus point, and yet there was a very deep intrusion that took place, which resolved just days before he came here. It was certainly not a one-off action by some errant commander as was sought to be made out. The second was at Chumar, when Xi Jinping came here in September 2014. It started before his arrival, continued during his arrival, and ended after he had returned to Beijing. Again, people here tried to dissimulate that it was a one-off action by an errant commander. I might mention that both the commanders, that means the head of the region, the Lanchao military region at that time, and the western and the military sub-district commander of Ali, both have got promotions after that. Now, if they had blotted their copybook when their commander-in-chief was here, then certainly promotion would not have happened. It was cleared. There is other information to point to the fact that it was cleared at the highest level. The third is Doklam, and I think that answers your question more to the point. When Doklam happened, it was certainly a new kind of an intrusion. It was not an intrusion into Indian territory per se, but it was a violation of an agreement that they had signed with us in 2012, that they will not unilaterally try and change the facts on the ground. For us it's important because if that road is built to Gemochen, the Chinese hope to reinforce their argument that Gemochen is the watershed, and Gemochen is the trilateral point from where the border will be drawn eastwards, putting Arunachal in China, whereas we are insisting that Batangla is the place. That is the actual key. The second is, of course, Doklam being on height, which we objected to. I think the crucial point here is that Doklam is not over, but the manner in which we handled it. We kept quiet. We didn't react tit for tat to Chinese propaganda, which, by the way, I have not seen that kind of language in over 40 years. But ultimately there was a peaceful
You mean
resolution.
the restraint with which Delhi
With
responded?
Delhi, yes. And I think that speaks to the fact that things were thought through and they had kept an avenue open which they were working towards. And I think finally it was Xi Jinping who realized that the Chinese army couldn't really achieve a decisive victory against India, which is what made him agree to a diplomatic resolution. There are enough indicators in China that the people are, if I may say, sullen and unhappy at the withdrawal, and which leads me to feel that there might be something else coming along in course of time. But this aggression that we are seeing is part and parcel of what they are talking about, the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, which means recovery of territories that were lost. Arunachal and J&K are part of that.
Are critical to that.
The third one, which doesn't come into prominence but which they have on their maps, is the Andamans.
Right, okay, well, hopefully India will be able to deal with that diplomatically before it even gets to that. But I think, that really is the question today, that you're spelling out areas in which they have willfully gone ahead with some sort of military action, whether it's low level or not, and all of them have coincided with specific diplomatic events that have taken place with India as well. Restraint is great, and it is something that's worked as far as bringing down the tensions around Doklam went, at least certainly 2 months ago, but as you said, it's far from over. Do you think the Chinese will push India consistently? I mean, is there an attempt to break this restraint, and is that something that Delhi needs to also look at in terms of what other options it has? Can restraint always be the only answer?
I think what you're asking me is frankly a wider question. That is, how do we see China-India relations develop? Is China really keen on having a peaceful neighborhood environment, as they put it?
For which peace with India is a critical part as well.
Yes, if you accept that argument.
Yeah.
Or is it that they want their neighbors to be in a subordinate role to Beijing? I think my own hunch is that they would like us to be in a subordinate role. And I point to Xi Jinping's visit here and his public speech in, I think it was the Taj Palace, where he said that India must dovetail its Look East and Act East policy and its Sagarmala projects with China's maritime Silk Route. In other words, subordinate our interest to theirs. The second, on the Belt and Road Initiative, or the One Belt, One Road, they've been applying a lot of pressure on us to join, including till the day before the forum.
That's right.
And that also,
which took place in May.
That also was to get us on board whether we like it or not. And now, having included that in the party constitution, the pressure on us will mount even more.
So what can India's response be?
Well, I think India will have to decide whether it is willing to stand firm or whether it wants to succumb to the Chinese. I think if we stand firm, that is what we need to do, in my personal estimation. I don't see us playing a second fiddle role to the Chinese. We haven't played it to the US or to Russians so far, or the old Soviet Union. So we will have to stand firm. And here I would just mention, the Doklam itself was the first time that any power or any country has stood up and blocked the Chinese created momentum for expansion which they were doing, whether it is South China Sea or on the land. So in a way, it does send a signal that countries can stand up. Now China may decide to redouble its efforts in order to subordinate others, or the others may take a cue from it. And I think here it is the Chinese who will have to set the agenda, not us. And the possibility is quite open that the Chinese may decide to take us on in order to keep the rest of the neighborhood quiet. And they have mentioned this earlier too. It's like, as the Chinese say, kill a chicken to frighten the monkey. So that they might do, that have a military encounter with us, small scale, but enough to punish us. And the message goes out to Japan, Vietnam, etc., that we've taken care of the biggest boy on the block, you behave yourselves.
So coming back, and I think this is a good way to sort of round off this conversation as well, to what we had mentioned in the beginning when we talked about India and what it can do and what its role will be on the spectrum of collusion and confrontation, etc. This whole Indo-Pacific partnership that has been talked about in the last couple of months by the United States, can that be an effective response to China in this region? Do you think that India can be more than just a counterweight and pull its own weight in an arrangement like this, where the United States is also a partner? Or is there a way to break through just that narrow prism with which many of us feel the United States sees India, which is that, you know, China is strong, let's prop India up because we don't want China to get too strong. Is there some way for this partnership to address these security concerns?
Well, I think in the final analysis, India has to stand on its own. The US will be a distant witness at all if anything happens. The second thing is we must develop the Indo-US partnership. Whether you call it Pacific Partnership or not is another thing. I call it the Indo-US Partnership. There have been projects signed when Obama was there,
right.
Co-development and co-production of the aircraft carrier and the jet engines. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to have really moved fast enough. I think those are major projects that we should push. At the same time, we do need to energize even more our relationships with Japan and with South Korea. I would suggest even with Taiwan, in order to benefit from their capital, from their technology, and from their production capacities, in order to strengthen ourselves. So I think the room for maneuver needs to be expanded, and this government is doing it very well. They have, improved, or shall I say, built on the relationships with the United States and with Japan, and I think that is the right direction in which to safeguard our interests.
And all these countries you mentioned are also originally part of the entire Trans-Pacific Partnership framework as well, and concerned about America's withdrawal from that. So that's a space
and of
that
China's
India
rise.
Yes, and that's a space that India can naturally sort of occupy. Also, finally, so that's in the wider region. In the subcontinent specifically, because I said you do get this a lot from India's neighbours. Apart from playing hardball, what are the other approaches that India can take by which it can sort of control or protect its preeminence as the leading player in South Asia, at least?
Well, I think hardball is yes. I mean, I did mention that, but I mentioned that also
in a context.
In the context. I think there are many areas which we need to have a fresh look at. Even in Nepal, I find a lot of people talk about it almost as a lost cause. I don't think so. I think there are a lot of linkages that we have with Nepal, and we must try and integrate Nepal even more with us. I don't mean integrate in a bad sense. What I mean is try and get them to have a stake in our growth. Similarly, in Bhutan, I think there's a lot that can be done. I was there recently in first week of September. I think that a lot of gainful employment, gainful opportunities can be given to the people of Bhutan by us, by the Indian economy. And I think these are the areas we need to look at. I'm purposely not mentioning Pakistan, but Sri Lanka similarly. And we have a lot of things that we can look at, but we need a fresh look. It's no more just saying that we are a democracy and we are like you. We have to give them tangible.
We shouldn't sort of fall into this big brother trap either.
Certainly not.
As far as the neighborhood is concerned.
Certainly not.
Yeah. Jayadeva Ranade, thank you so much for giving the wire some of your time. Xi Jinping's China out on the book stands now. All you want to know about the man who, as we've just said, is one of the strongest leaders in the world, and one we should all sort of watch for in terms of what he can and cannot do on the world stage. Thank you very much for being part of this. Thank you.